Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here at the Snowdon Deli. I'm Aaron Rand from CJD, along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette, and our special guest today, leader of the Quebec Provincial Party. Did I mention the Conservative Party?
It's important.
Almost.
It's a distinct.
Almost got you as premier there for a second. Conservative Party leader Éric Duhaime. Éric, thank you for coming.
It's
Welcome
always a
back.
pleasure. Thank you very much.
So there's a lot that's happened since the last time we spoke. Let's start
the
first
last
of all.
week?
Yeah, really, since yesterday. Let's start with François Legault announcing his resignation. That's now a couple of weeks ago. And what this changes on the political landscape for you specifically and your party specifically, if anything.
Well, first off, I don't think it's a huge surprise for anyone. I mean, we saw the numbers of the CAQ going down the drain. It's the most unpopular government ever in our lifetime. And on the eve of his resignation, there was even a poll putting us as Conservatives 5 points ahead of the government. We don't even have one member at the National Assembly, and we're 5% higher than the current government. So I think it shouldn't be a surprise. Does it change something? That's the real question, because it's very hard to think about what's the CAQ without François Legault, because he's the one who created it from scratch, and he unites everybody. Because when you look ideologically, are they federalists or separatists? We're not 100% sure. Are they left-wing, right-wing? We don't know. It's François Legault. It's a bunch of Legault people sticking together. He was kind of the glue of the thing. Now that he's gone, what's left? It's going to be a very interesting question, and to watch what's going to happen with the leftovers of the CAQ. Almost all the high-profile ministers are announcing one after the other that they're leaving. So it's going to be interesting to see what's left. I think it's going to be it's the end of an era. I think the CAQ was kind of a parenthesis in our history, and I think we're going to be back to where we were before the CAQ arrived. I don't think that it's sustainable in the long run without Legault.
As you point out, you're ahead of the CAQ. You were ahead of Quebec Solidaire, not far behind the Liberals in some instances.
Among francophones, we're higher than the Liberals.
And yet, you would have to think now that there's a big opening for you because...
Huge.
And yet, as you point out, you don't have a seat, and which boggles the mind because you would think that you would.
That's going to change in October, hopefully. But you're right to point out that even if we look at all the polls currently, outside of Montreal, it's a battle between us and the Parti Québécois. And that's exactly what happened in the by-election that I ran in Victoriaville and Arthabasca a few months ago, and it's the same thing that could happen in Chicoutimi, where there's a by-election on February 23rd. It is really a battle between us and the Parti Québécois. The Liberals are stuck with their scandals. They have 4 investigations going on with all the allegations of corruption. It's not very appealing for many Quebecers. The CAQ, we don't know even when they stand for. Quebec Solidaire is also melting down. And there's been so many political stories. Just if you can go back from a month or a month and a half, it's like another reality, politically speaking. It completely shifted overnight in Quebec. I think within a month and a half, it changed more than in a decade almost. So there's been so many things happening. But for us, surprisingly, we have no members, and we're the new party, and we're the stability kind of in the group. I'm going to be the only one with Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon who's going to be at the leaders' debate, and all the other party will have changed leaders, in some cases even twice. We don't know exactly what the other parties are standing for. Their platforms are not elaborated. Us, it's very stable. So I think we have a great opportunity to do to mark history in a certain way.
Let me just bring something up. I find this fascinating with the idea of we don't even know what their policies are going to be. When I've spoken to you in the past, and we've had people on the radio react to the interview, people say, and I'm sure you may have heard this, I really like Éric Duhaime. I like how he sounds. But I don't really know what that party stands for. I don't know any other members of the Conservative Party in Quebec other than Éric Duhaime. So I'm not sure I could vote for someone like that. So you just talked about party platforms.
Yeah.
What does the Conservative Party provincially stand for? What's in your platform?
Well, we're a small C conservative party, so we want less government, lower taxes, make sure we add the contribution of the private sector to have some competition in healthcare, exploit our natural resources, including our natural gas. So there's strong policies of the party that differentiate us from all the others. I think that's the main thing. We want to cut the bureaucracy by 20,000 bureaucrats. So there's very clear positions that we've been defending for ages. We have a party convention coming up on January 31st and February 1st in Quebec City, to finish our program before the election. It's going to be our last convention before the election. And regarding our team, you're also right. That's why we were the first party to start announcing candidates. Even yesterday, I was in Quebec City announcing 2 more candidates. We're going to have over 20 candidates announced by the end of the month. So we are pushing to make sure that more and more people are known within the conservative ranks. But it's not an easy challenge, because obviously when you're a party that has no member at the National Assembly, we have 1 or 2% of the visibility in the mainstream media, even if we're at 16% in support. We're mainly a party that is communicating via the social media. That's mainly how people know us. And we're reaching out a lot with the younger generation, because that's how they get informed. But for us, it's much more difficult for people who are a little bit older. Yeah.
Okay.
What you didn't point out, which is very key to your agenda, is that you're Federalist.
Well, yeah, but I'm not mentioning it because I don't want a referendum, so I'm not in that
No, but
paradigm.
that's where you might have great opportunity in the regions, not
Yeah.
just Montreal, if there's a possibility, because as all these polls indicate, a lot of the PQ support comes from people who are not necessarily interested in independence at all, which would seem to suggest that you, who does have a footprint in the regions, might have a chance with those kind of people not looking for a referendum.
You're absolutely right, but because the reason why I don't mention it too much is because I think people are sick and tired of the constitutional feuds. When I talk to people, they talk to me about the fact that the grocery store, the bills are going up the roof. They have to renew their mortgage, and they're scared because they're going to pay $200-300 more per month, and they don't have the money to do that. The youth is trying to have access to the property. They want to buy their first house to found a family, and they can't afford it. It's $1 million on average here in Montreal. That's the kind of people are waiting for healthcare services. That's the kind of thing that people are talking to me about. I haven't met one voter yet who told me that he's dreaming of another referendum. I mean, it's all a creation of some media and some politicians, and unfortunately, the Liberals and the Parti Québécois are part of the problem in Quebec, because they feed each other, because that's the only thing that defines them clearly, and they're nostalgic of the 1980 or 1995 referendum, but Quebecers have nothing to do with that. That's part of our history books. It's not part of our future, and unfortunately, we could play in that movie again, because there's 2 parties that are obsessed with that referendum issue. But there's no appetite. Believe me, I was in Chicoutimi 2 days ago. I was in Quebec City yesterday. There's not one single voter in Quebec that's talking to me about that they want a referendum ASAP.
Yet I think you said when we just started, you think this election is basically going to be all about what we voted for in 1980. And it's this all over again. It's going to be about a party that says, come hell or high water, we are going to have a referendum if we get into power. That's what people are going to hear. That's what the fight is going to be against, is it not?
I'm scared that you're right, and it doesn't mean that we're closer to separation. It's actually the opposite. And if there was a referendum today, there's less than 1 Quebecer out of 3 who would vote yes. But in Quebec, you can form a majority government right now with 31% of the votes. And by promoting separation, you're feeding those hardcore separatists, and you can be elected with a majority. In the good old days, if you had 30% of the vote, you were cooked. I mean, 30% you would be in opposition forever. But nowadays, because the way the political landscape is structured, they could win a majority, and that's what's scary, is that the interest of the Parti Québécois is not the interest of Quebecers right now. And unfortunately, they could win the election, and that's why we have to tell every single person who's considering voting for the Parti Québécois, don't do that mistake. Especially, there's 1 person out of 4 who's considering voting for the Parti Québécois that wouldn't even vote yes if there were a referendum. So it shows you how there's total confusion right now, and hopefully the next election will be a time for clarity.
But that was a game that the PQ could play, because at the time their main opposition was the CAQ, and the CAQ has since gone away. Essentially, it's I don't know what's going to happen to their future, but it was a good political game to play then. It's a different game now, and I think that you're addressing that point, and that's what's going to become very critical, I think, for the next election. People not interested and wanting alternatives of affordability in this sort of situation.
Absolutely. It's not going well in Quebec right now. I mean, the economic situation is not good. Talk to anyone about anything. I'm going to talk about the forest industry, for example. We're going to lose 30,000 jobs, according to the Premier, within the next few months in Quebec. in many communities in Quebec, you know, it's the only big job employer. Like it's the only big thing economically speaking in like 200-300 communities all across Quebec. And it seems that we're not concerned about that. That for me, I'm freaking out when you go in those small villages and small towns. I mean, you know, they're wondering what's going to happen to us. And
Wait, is this U.S. tariff related? Why is
there is U.S. tariffs related, but there's also the carbon tax. Just the carbon tax in Quebec, we're the only ones who are still paying a carbon tax. It accounts for half of the difference between Quebec and Ontario. We're not talking about even about the U.S. but just the difference of price. Why we're not competitive anymore? Well, half of it is because we're paying carbon tax, and the rest of the country is not. And
so
nobody
you would
wants
eliminate that if you were
Yes,
elected?
we need to eliminate the carbon tax. I mean, it's you know, and especially now, I don't know if you saw it, but the government announced that their targets for
greenhouse gas.
greenhouse, they're lowering them, or they're pushing it another 5 years.
Yeah.
Well, why should we pay a green fund, to reduce gases that we were already saying that we're not going to achieve the targets? We're not going to reach them. So it's a lot of waste of money. And why should Quebecers pay alone while the rest of the continent is not paying? We're not going to solve the climate change problem just in Quebec by paying a few $1 billion extra every year. It's going to happen all together, or it's not going to happen at all. But politically, it's good to say, oh, we're green. But there's a cost for Quebecers right now, and we shouldn't be alone paying it.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowdon Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the hub of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowdon Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowdon Delicatessen. I want to go to what you said before. When we talk about big issues, if we can leave sort of separation of the referendum aside, which will be an issue, you talked about bread and butter issues.
Yes.
You talked about healthcare. You talked about housing.
About carbon tax.
Carbon tax. Now, what would you do? I mean, we're looking at a healthcare system, even now under Santé Quebec, that I think most people recognize as a mess. The government picked a fight with doctors, specialists. What would you do to fix the healthcare system?
Well, we would do what the best systems in the world do. We would have competition. And it's always a scary issue when we talk about two-tier healthcare, and you know, there's always smear campaigns regarding that. But look at what's going on in Europe, the best systems in the world. Look at Germany, look at the Scandinavian countries, even in France. You know, we have a public insurance, and I think everybody wants to keep the public insurance. So it means that you have access to healthcare services no matter how much you earn, and you don't need to pay for those services. But who's providing the services doesn't need to be the state. It's like when you're buying an insurance on your car. It's not the insurance company that is doing cars and is selling cars. They're going around shopping, and what we see, for example, in Sweden, is that if it's unreasonable, the waiting lists are unreasonable, well, you can go with your public card and you can go in a private institution and they would pay for it. And if you want to pay directly, you can also go. And if it's cheaper in the private sector to offer a certain service than in the public sector, then you can go directly to the private sector, no matter if there's a waiting list or not. So this is the kind of thing that we need to do. And we have to stop thinking that one single individual can solve everything. We don't need a genius as health minister. We had Christian Dubé, and he failed. And he's a good guy. He's a good manager. It's not a matter of competence. It's a matter of centralization. It doesn't work. Our system needs to be decentralized, and there needs to be competition.
We already have a private sector now, and then, of course, the complaint is if you have to wait in the public sector for a year and a half for a procedure, you go to the private sector, but people say, but then you pay so much more, it's not fair. How do you solve that problem?
Well, first off, it's not just people who are wealthy who would be able to go to the private sector in our model. It would be like what's going on in Europe. I'm a believer that when there is competition, when there is private sector, things are done cheaper at better, and the services are better at the end of the day. And that's exactly what we see what's happening. If the government, when there's a public monopoly, the services are not good because they're focusing, their priority is not the service to the population. And that's what's been going on with the healthcare system.
Do you eliminate Santé Quebec?
Well, of course. Why did we create that? We created a bunch of top guns who are costing us a fortune, and it didn't improve the services to the population by an inch. So I think we need to eliminate that kind of bureaucracy. That's part of the problem. It's not part of the solution. Quebecers are paying more and more and more every year for healthcare services, and they're waiting more and more and more. The system is broke, and it's not one party with a change of minister that is going to solve the problem.
Interesting. Aaron pointed out, and we've had you on this podcast. This is your third time, and the reaction's always been really, really good in terms of Anglos, particularly. And yet, as you point out, I mean, the party is basic. People just basically know you. If you're going to make inroads in Montreal, where the Liberals seem to always have it, the deck is loaded to their favor. Don't you think you need some candidates
Absolutely.
that are well known? And
look, next time, don't invite me. Invite Karim Elayoubi, Dr. Karim Elayoubi, who's the physician, who's the guy who wrote our platform on healthcare, who's a very, very smart guy who can talk about our policies on healthcare much better than I do. We have a team of people, and we need to put them forward. You're right, but it's
candidates.
It's
so
very
I think
difficult
yes.
because the. Often I would say, okay, look, I get an interview request and on healthcare, and I'm saying, okay, Karim is going to be there. Oh, no, if it's not Eric, we don't. The media, unfortunately, the traditional media, they like clicks also. Right? They think that when it's the leader that is showing up, they're going to get more clicks than if it's someone else. But you're right, we need to make sure we push, because a political party is not a single individual, it's a team.
I would ask again if I can go back to what we call the bread and butter issues. We talk about healthcare. You talk about affordability.
Yes.
It's expensive. What other plans do you have beyond healthcare to bring the cost of living down, to help people, the ones you mentioned, to help them be able to cope?
Well, first off, we need to cut the spending, because if we want to have money to give to people and leave money in their wallet, we have to stop spending. Quebec is spending more and more and more, and I voted for the CAQ in 2018, like many Quebecers, like a majority of Quebecers, and we were all disappointed because we voted for that. We thought it was a government that would downsize the state, and they did the exact opposite. Today, as we speak, there's never been as much bureaucrats working for the Quebec government than today. We need to lower that. We're talking about 20,000 to start with, to have some margin of maneuver to give back money to the people, because you cannot just say we're going to give more money if you're not saying where you're going to take it. So we need to lower the spending, and the spending has been out of control. We also need to stop subsidizing businesses, private businesses. It's been a huge fiasco under the CAQ. We're always talking about Northvolt, but there's hundreds of those stories, unfortunately, going on. And it's always easy for politicians to try to look good and say, "Oh, we're going to be the first one in the world to have electric buses for our kids to go to school." And then you put $450 million in Lyon Electric, and you end up with a huge mess and a huge waste. We need to stop doing that. It's not the role of the government to decide winners and losers among small private businesses. We need to leave the business alone.
Eric, you have to be a little concerned about what's going on globally
Yes.
speaking with Mr. Trump and the reaction at Davos, and certainly Mr. Carney's comeback, in essence, his speech. What are your thoughts on that level?
Well, I think Mr. Carney's right on one thing. The world, the reality, the world order has changed. And no matter if Donald Trump is still president or not in the U.S., I think over the next few years, there is going to be a change, a protectionist era, unfortunately, ahead of us. And how do we react to that? We have the opportunity and the chance in Quebec of having a lot of natural resources. And that's why I'm a big promoter of we need to exploit our oil and gas in Quebec. We need to be more self-sufficient. It's not normal that we live in Canada, that when we want to have gas and oil from Alberta, it needs to go through the U.S. It makes no sense that we're dependent on the U.S. to have oil and gas coming from Canada. So we need to exploit, we need to build pipelines all across our country. We need to reinforce our national sovereignty within Canada in terms of energy. Energy is huge. I mean, it's very strategic. Oh, look what's going on in Ukraine, and a lot of those conflicts are based first and foremost because for access to natural resources. and energy. So I think that we need to be more self-sufficient. And in Quebec, that's the policies at the provincial level. That's the policies that we could promote to help with the new era.
Do you think that message resonates with voters, though? Remember the whole problem in Quebec, François Legault standing up and saying dirty oil. I know that was then and this is now. Do you think you can sell that message?
Well, we need to. I mean, we realize today that no matter where oil comes from, it's very unusual that it's clean. And secondly, we're not going to get rid of oil tomorrow morning. I mean, even natural gas is perceived as a transition energy, and we have an opportunity in Quebec of having probably the biggest unexploited reserve in the world. We elected the CAQ. I remember I read his book. François Legault said he wanted to do a Norway of America with Quebec by exploiting our natural gas. Not only did he didn't fulfill his commitment, but he passed a bill with the support of the Liberals and the PQ to ban exploration and exploitation in Quebec. It's completely irresponsible, especially with the new political reality around the world. I think it's time to move on and to say we're going to be able to create, very well-paid jobs. We're going to have higher standards in terms of environment than where we're importing it from right now. We were listening to documentaries in the U.S. and Pennsylvania about how horrible it was and everything. Look what the Americans did. They dig. And look, today they're self-sufficient, and we listen to those documentaries, and today we're not making a penny, and it's even worse than that. We had rights that those companies used to have on the Quebec territory. Now they're suing the Quebec government for a few $billion, and we might end up to pay because we refuse to exploit the rights that we gave to private companies. So we're going to be completely, not only are we not making money, but we're going to pay because we're not making money. It's ridiculous.
I want to bring up one thing. I spoke to Paul St. Pierre Plamondon. We had him on the podcast a couple of weeks ago.
I watched it.
Okay, so I will ask the question now because I think something has changed since the Mark Carney speech in Davos, since the speech yesterday to Canadians. It seems that Paul St. Pierre Plamondon is hyper-focused, obviously, on a referendum, on a separation. That's the number one plank in their platform. But this idea, which I found odd, because we're talking about, bread and butter issues, he seems to be hyper-focused on this idea of, look what the CAQ said they would get from the federal government. And I think he actually used a number of 21 items, things.
Yeah.
And we got none of it. And I thought that's an odd focus to have about what we asked to get, what we didn't get. What difference does that make? Is that going to become a play? Is that important for you, for the Conservative Party?
In Quebec, obviously, we have a reality that is different than the rest of the continent. Of course, there's a majority of francophones that feel threatened for good reasons. I mean, we have to always be cautious to protect our language, our culture. I'm happy to see that the English community in Quebec has never been as bilingual and as proud of being part of that difference in North America. And I think that we should celebrate that all together instead of, building tensions between us. But in terms of the power of Quebec, that's how I call it. For me, it's very important. And that's why I'm against the referendum, because we had a referendum in 1980, we had a referendum in 1995. In both situations, the power of Quebec went down. Yeah. I mean, we lost because we were in a position of weakness because we were divided. I think all Quebecers could talk in one voice. We all agree that we should control certain areas, that we don't like the invasion of the federal government in our jurisdiction. We want to make sure that they respect the fundamental law of this country, the Constitution of Canada. And when they're not doing it, they're feeding the separatist movement. When they're interfering in provincial jurisdiction.
Okay, well, let me stop you. What are they interfering in as far as you're concerned?
Well, whenever they're coming up with a program on in healthcare or there's all sorts of programs that the federal government is developing, and it's always perceived, and it's not just perceived, they're always pushing the envelope to try, and in immigration also lately, that was a good example. I mean, the federal government allowed way too many immigrants. Even the Liberals now are saying that, yes, there was way too many people in a very short period of time. We couldn't absorb it. We didn't have the housing for those people.
But isn't the counter to that Quebec has more control over immigration than any other province in the country?
We already do. But that being said, we have to make sure that we protect that and we don't let the federal government decide for us. So these are the kind of things that we need to reinforce and we need to underline because there's always going to be, we're always going to be in a minority situation, obviously, as francophones in North America, and we will always need a strong Quebec government. So it's a different situation than the rest of the country, but we have allies in English Canada, and that's why I think it's different as conservative. As you know, the conservatives, I've always been more in favor of decentralization. Like no matter if it's in Quebec or elsewhere in Canada, philosophically, when you're a conservative, you want the power to be closer to the individual by definition. The Liberals and the NDP, it's the opposite. They always like big structure and big government and centralization. So I think we have allies in the rest of Canada. And currently, the champion of provincial rights, and it's very surprising, it's the first time maybe in Canada's history, is not the Quebec Premier, it's the Alberta Premier right now. Right. She's the one fighting for provincial rights and provincial jurisdiction, much more than Quebec, and even Saskatchewan at a certain extent is doing it right now. And I think we should build bridges, because we have strong allies in Canada, and that's what, as a conservative, I think it's going to be easier for me to build those bridges with our allies in English Canada.
Speaking of federal politics, it's no secret that Mr. Poilievre is a fan of yours.
Yes.
And has talked and rumored to have asked you many times to join the federal forces. And there's some talk that, well, if things don't turn out the next provincial election, would you ever consider going?
Look, as I said when I ran for the leadership of the Conservatives in Quebec, I was here for a decade of public service, and that's what I'm doing right now, and that's my only commitment. For me, my lifetime challenge is to make sure that the Conservatives are back in the National Assembly, and we're very close right now, and I'm not going to give up or surrender just on the eve of achieving our goal.
That I understand, but the point is, whereas you attract a lot of people here, Mr. Poilievre doesn't have that same kind of magnetism, it seems, amongst Quebecers, and it's kind of interesting, and I could see where he would want someone like you.
No, but no matter what the results of the last election, they were disappointing for Conservatives because they didn't win the majority. But the score he did nationally was quite impressive. I mean, he did the best score since Brian Mulroney. He improved his number of seats, even here in Quebec. I think there's room to grow, but it's not been a disaster, and I think far from that. So we have to stay focused, and the worst thing that could happen is internal fighting, and that's what I want to make sure that this conservative movement of Canada escapes, that we don't fight against each other.
There was a poll out, I think today or yesterday, where it said if only young people voted, 18 to 29, the Conservatives would win like a huge majority.
Provincially is the same thing.
Same thing. But if it was only old people who voted over 50, the Liberals would win. That gives you hope?
It gives me hope, and it's also, for those of us who are a little bit older, we remember that it used to be the opposite. When you were... We even said, I don't know in English how you say it, but in French we say, quand tu as 20 ans puis tu votes pas à gauche, tu n'as pas de cœur. Quand tu as 40 ans puis tu votes encore à gauche, tu n'as pas de tête. So when you're 20 and you're voting, you're not voting on the left, you have no heart. And when you're 40 and you're still voting left, you have no head. Because the evolution of life was that we were leftists in our young age, and we were growing conservative. Well, nowadays it's the exact opposite. When you're young, you're
That's
conservative.
What I found interesting.
And it's not the youth that has changed. It's the reality. Because when you're 20 today in Quebec and you see that it costs $1 million to buy a house in Montreal, you know that you're never ever going to be able to afford that. And you want to found a family. You still have the same motivation. You want to, meet the love of your life, and marry that person, have a house, have kids, have a good job. I mean, it's very, very basic. The human beings didn't change, but today, to achieve that dream, it has to go through the right instead of the left, historically. And today, the state is not helping them to fulfill that dream. They're depriving them from that dream. And I think that's why we see the youth reacting very differently than their parents or their grandparents.
So we're going to have to wrap up. I do want to ask you. I know
started.
It flies by. We're in Montreal. Part of the consideration here has always been typically Montrealers vote Liberal.
Yes.
Things may change a little bit now. You mentioned the scandals, of course, off the top. I noticed in François Legault's resignation speech last week, he took a shot at Montreal.
Yeah.
He actually took a minute to point out the decline of French in Montreal specifically, driving that wedge even further. With respect to Montreal, with respect to Anglos and rights, What do you do with Bill 96, for example, and Bill 21 if you become premier?
Well, we didn't change our positions on that. As you know, I've always been way before the Liberals, and we didn't flip-flop. I've always been against Bill 96, and I think time has given us reason, because what I said at the time was that they're just poking the English community, but it's not going to change anything about the reality of Quebec. So if Mr. Legault is making that statement, and he's talking about his own record, so it means that his policies obviously didn't work if he thinks French is declining in Montreal, because his own bill obviously was not focused and was not the right one to do. But I have a message for Montrealers at the same time. You know, the Liberal Party does not deserve your vote anymore. And it's not a change of a face as leader that they need. They need to go in opposition very, very low and to make sure they clean up their mess. And unfortunately, but with the non-Francophones still voting Liberal highly, no matter how the scandals and the allegations of corruption, they're sending them the wrong signal. And they don't deserve your vote, and they need to clean up their mess before they can talk to you and you could consider them. And it's a huge problem to see a party that is going through so many scandals, and that the Anglophones are still a majority saying that they would vote for the Liberals. It makes zero sense. I mean, it's not true that all the Anglophones are corrupted. I don't believe that for a second. But why are they voting for politicians that have so many allegations of corruption? We need to wonder why. It's not normal. It's not healthy from a democratic perspective.
Well, it's very simple. I mean, on a level of referendum, it's all about.
Yeah, but there's a way that how
Yeah.
long can you hold your nose? You know.
Yeah.
And you don't think a change in leadership makes any difference at all when it was someone like a
I'm not
Strauss
even
Maillard
sure
gets
if
in?
it's Pablo Rodriguez who was the problem. I mean, the same allegations were there a generation earlier, and it's the same people who are behind the
Okay.
scenes, and those people are not going to change because they're changing the leader. There needs to be a stronger job at the grassroots level within that party that they're not doing. And it's very easy to change the leader. It's much more difficult to change the internal culture of a party. And what does the Liberal Party of Quebec stand for? Other than saying that they're against the referendum, what do they stand for? We don't even know. And if I don't know, it's possible that people who are listening to us have no clue. It's not a party that, you know, when was last time that the Quebec Liberals brought a new idea on the political scene in Quebec? We were probably not alive, any of us.
Well, I will point out the last provincial Liberal government left a $6 billion surplus compared to a $13 billion deficit.
That's true. That we have to commend Carlos Leitao for that. He was a finance minister that was much more conservative than the CAQ. But I mean, in terms of new ideas, in terms of policies, in terms of where they stand, you know, within the caucus currently, there's people who could sit with Quebec Solidaire and some others who could be with me in the Conservative Party. Like, they're all over the map. And it's not normal. And so I think that it needs to change. And that's what I'm going to push for. And, you know, there's a lot of people who are telling me, Eric, don't waste your time with English Montrealers or English Quebecers, because they're going to vote Liberal no matter what. Well, if we think like that, it means it's the end of democracy, because it means that group is hostage of a party, and that there's never going to be able to happen anything. And the Liberals are not going to talk to you because they're going to take you for granted, and the others are not going to talk to you because they know you're going to vote Liberal anyway. So this situation needs to change for the health of democracy in Quebec.
We will leave it at that. Mr. Duhaime, thank you, as
Merci
always, for
beaucoup.
being with
Thank
us.
you very
Good to
much.
see you again.
Always a
Thank
pleasure.
you. We wrap up this edition of the Corner Booth Podcast. We'll see you again soon.